Hey, it's Wallace from Metis Real Estate here. A bunch of you has sent me this all-in podcast over the weekend. Just when we thought we were going to have a slow, easygoing weekend, a lot of you wanted answers to this. So rather than the planned newsletter update, I figured I'd sit down and voice my personal opinions that don't reflect NAR, CAR, our core brokerage, or our team members. This is just a conversation between you and me and my thoughts on the topic. First and foremost, there are four things I want to talk about before we get to the actual video. The first and foremost is a big thank you for always supporting Metis. You have a lot of choices out there in real estate, and it means the world to myself and my team for you always choosing and using us for your real estate solutions. The other thing I wanted to apologize about is the sound quality. I am at home. I don't have all the proper equipment like our recording studio. And because it is a sunny day, our neighbor decided to cut down the trees and manage the vegetation in their backyard. So great neighbor stuff, but you may hear chainsaws and whatnot throughout the video. Third, I want to talk about the origins of Metis. One of the people who has sent me the All-In podcast was Metis client number one. Metis client number one is super important and always dear to my heart. I always feel like he's been the start of the company, but he's also pushed us and he's also been a critique in many different ways. First and foremost, Metis exists to create value where value isn't there. And one of the arguments that All-In makes is the ability to find properties these days. They're all listed on Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, etc. The property that we discovered for him was actually a property he identified himself, and we went ahead and made the transaction happen where it wasn't listed on the MLS, it wasn't disclosed to anyone else. And then years later, we did it again. We lollied him from that initial property to one of the most amazing properties we were able to transition a client in the last couple years. Those opportunities don't exist. And for the average type of buyer, you're busy with your day jobs. You're busy with what's going on in 9 to 5 and what's going on with your families. The last thing you're doing is really qualifying properties through Zillow and Trulia. That's really kind of where we come in and we do the digging for you, and we figure out how we can make these deals happen. Also, the original origin of Metis was to lower fees, to change the pricing dynamic, to really disrupt the model, to really siphon down and get rid of all the stack, what we call fluff in real estate, at least what I thought was unnecessary services. Like anything that starts with a luxury is bullshit. You don't need a luxury espresso barista at your open homes. You don't need signs that cost $200 where we could go out and get competitive signs for $50. You don't need to pay for an agent's Armani suit or black S-Class, things like that. So we wanted to filter out all the unnecessary items, and we wanted to re-add and focus on the services that did make sense. Also, credit to client number one, who not only was the first one to send the All-In podcast over, but he also brought up the fact that when we changed from a so-called discount model to a full service model, that he reminded when I did that, I also made the decision to elevate every bit of that piece. When real estate agents were still taking photos with their cell phones and not doing the video and not telling the story of the home and not doing proper brochures, really kind of skimping by and providing the service where I thought was a disservice, he gave us kudos for really elevating those aspects of the industry. And today it's the services that we created in 2015, 2016 are standard practice today. And the stuff that we're working on now hopefully continues to progress and pushes us in that direction. Fourth, we've always been value driven. We've always gone out and wanted to create and provide additional value. We always wanted to go out and put our best foot forward out there and really give the best product that we can. And I think that's one of the core values here at Metis. That's one of the reasons why you hire a Metis agent. That's one of the reasons why you reach out to solve your real estate solutions. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the show and jump into the All In podcast.
All right, we covered that huge NAR lawsuit back in December, and there has been a settlement. Big news for the National Association of Realtors. They've agreed to pay $418 million in a settlement last week. And a federal jury found that the NAR and several large real estate brokerages conspired to artificially inflate agent commissions. The settlement is pretty big deal. People are freaking out about it. As you know, the seller of a home pays the buyer's agent's commission. So you have a buyer and a seller, 6% fee typically, sometimes it's 5%, but they split that 3% to the buyer and the seller. But the seller is paying that 3% to the buyer. Now that can't be listed in the MLS anymore, and that deal cannot be done ahead of time. Buyers are responsible for paying their agents commissions going forward. So if you bought $1 million house and you were the buyer, you would pay $30,000 to your buyer's agent, or you would choose to not have an agent, or you would choose to negotiate it. And you have to have a signed contract. This is a crazy, just shock to the system, according to most people who are in it. I've seen a lot of real estate folks who are saying this is going to be healthy because you have to have this conversation between the buyer's agent and the buyer. But commissions in the United States are $100 billion a year, and one analyst projected the lawsuit would lead to a 30% reduction in commission payments, and that would eliminate about half of the 1.6 million active NRA members from the industry. You had a lot of feelings on this, Friedberg, when we talked about it a couple of months ago. What are your thoughts on this settlement? Is anything going to change? Is this as groundbreaking and shocking as people seem to think it is?
First and foremost, arguments are built on a cornerstone and then the foundation. We should always have a conversation of how our services are rendered and set the expectation of how we're compensated for those services. Here, something that's fundamentally wrong is that says a seller pays the commission, and that's a pretty common misnomer. When agents start listing buyers and work for these buyers, a lot of times they say, my work for you is free. When you purchase a property, the seller actually compensates me for the work I've done. And that's a big fallacy and one of the cornerstones of the lawsuit against NAR. The buyer actually completes the circle and funds the whole thing. And one of the things that they stipulate is when I sign a listing agreement, I negotiate that fee with the seller, and then I have to pre-negotiate that commission or that incentive for the buyer or the selling agent in this case. And you also have to keep in mind that this lawsuit is not in California, it's out east, and NAR represents the entire nation, not just specific municipalities. In the areas that we work with, along the coasts and in major metropolitans, our average price point when we began was about $625,000, and through the years our average transaction today is about 1.7 to 1.8 million without blinking eyes. So it's a lot more than 30,000 per transaction. But that being said, the argument is we pre-negotiate that selling commission, and it's a culture of we're expected to pay that 3% out. That number has always been negotiable, but it's always been up for debate. But the fact is, when the seller a seller negotiates that, but buyer completes it. So the buyer would ultimately get financing or get cash or figure out how to pay for it. It would go to the seller, and then the seller pays the seller's brokerage, and that brokerage kind of splits everything out. A couple remedies to this is, rather than the seller paying the listing brokerage and then the listing brokerage paying the selling brokerage, would be just two debits from the title company, one going directly to the listing brokerage and then them compensating the listing agent, and another going directly to the selling brokerage and then them compensating the selling or the agent representing the buyer. So there's a couple ways where this can shake out, but fundamentally the buyer completes the circle, not the seller.
Well, I would take this settlement along with a lot of the developments and advances in AI as being the moment of catalyzing real change in the residential real estate agency industry. It's an industry that's been known to have fixed pricing and be very expensive to consumers, a real tax on the system. And it's largely been wrapped around this idea of mitigating your liability, reducing risk, servicing the customer. Many of those aspects over the last couple of years have been largely standardized through forms, digitized, because so much of this information is no longer going to get paperwork from the courthouse, but a lot of the information sits digitally and can be accessed in a democratized way. And the fact that so much of the service and discovery, reading through documents, understanding what they mean and what they say, can be automated through AI and LLMs. Much of this is kind of coalescing around what I hope and expect will be a more seamless, automated, direct marketplace for consumers. The challenge is that most consumers put most of their personal net worth into their home. And so it is where most people's net worth is tied up. And so because it is such a sensitive investment and it is their entire savings, they want to have a trusted advisor by them. So it's going to take some time before that trusted advisor becomes some piece of software. But I do think that software is going to play more and more of a role in providing advisory tools and services to consumers in this transaction marketplace. And that's only going to catalyze and accelerate the fee reduction. I do project and I do expect that much of what is charged on a commission basis, on a percent of home value today, will change to being a fixed fee and a flat fee basis.
5K, 10K for your buyer's agent.
Different services. So you can have someone do
a la carte.
Do the disclosure diligence for me for 5K. Negotiate the purchase for me for 10K. And you as a consumer will start to pick from a menu of the services that you want to have rendered for you and things that you're comfortable doing yourself. I don't need someone to negotiate price. I don't need someone to find me a home. I've got Redfin. I can go do that. I can arrange open houses on my own. The lockbox is there. I'll go walk around the property. I don't need someone to point out that the color is nice in a room. And so I think that there's elements of what will happen here, which is a fragmentation and then an automation of these services. And as a result, significant fee reduction. And I'm in the middle of doing this myself right now with a piece of real estate where I'm not using an agent. And I've been using a direct listing service. I've used all of these standard forms. There's a lot of AI tools you can use to kind of read all the disclosures for you, make sure everything's copacetic. And these escrow agents, they'll handle a lot of what a lawyer will handle. And they'll get paid a fee, which is much less than the agent's fee. So I do think that there's a big disruption happening in this industry. I think it's really important for consumers. Agents are going to be, hands in the air telling you this is ridiculous. You need someone to help you. You need an advisor. That will continue for a good chunk of the market for a very long period of time. But I do think that it's for the benefit of consumers over time to see these fees come out of the system and see those savings go back into consumers' pockets, and for the value of their real estate to go in their pockets, not into an agent's pocket.
Is it going to change the...
So I do like what he said there. There is a depository and of information, or what we call a brain trust in our team. Also leveraging AI to go through there and extrapolate case scenarios. About 20 years ago, there's a company founded called Trulia that really kind of Trojan horsed into the real estate industry. And back then I was still a pundit for real estate technology. I was still discussing how companies navigate through there. And when Trulia came to market, followed by Redfin and Zillow, they had two things that they primarily did. One was they democratized the MLS. They took what was called an IDX feed, or information data exchange, and they were able to publicly launch that, meaning you didn't have to go to like metisre.com to find homes. You didn't have to go to a realtor's site to find homes. You didn't have to go to the MLS to find homes. What they created was a portal and a marketplace for listings, and people were going there directly, and agents and brokerages were getting all huffy and puffy about, like, this is our data and how do we keep clients within our feed. And the news agencies and pundits are saying this is the end of brokers, it's the end of real estate. Lawyers and transactional based services will come in. That was 20 years ago, and I think the role of an agent has never been more important. And I come from that from the adversarial standpoint. These numbers are larger than most people handle in their lifetimes, and like he said, a lot of people's personal wealth has tied up in these assets, and you need someone to one thing I didn't like when getting into Metis is one of the facts in real estate is most agents do 2 to 3 transactions a year, and they're considered working. In any other field, when you're doing 2 to 3 transactions a year, you know, you shouldn't be in that field. So the ecosystem has created kind of a lackluster effect, and which kind of sunk the performance of, or the perception of, a realtor. But I still think those who understand what they're doing and are able to contrive and deliver value will still have a place today and forevermore. One of the top producing agents I worked with in 2020 when consulting there said, Wallace, this is a belly to business. It is relationship driven. If you're good with people, you will be good in this industry. If you're unable to convey value, if you're unable to think outside the box, if you just regurgitate the stuff that you're spoon fed, you're going to be out of the business real soon. So while I don't agree that AI and software is going to solve everything, I do think it's going to make that role easier. Like when I mentioned, you know, yes, it's a great thing consumers have access to the MLS data. It's a great thing buyers are able to see and filter home themselves. They don't have to rely on someone who is arguably worse with technology than they are. Technology is able to solve great problems. But with this onslaught of information, they really need someone to decipher the information for them and tell them, you know, the quality of homes to the future homes, to how to modify homes to fit their needs, or really go outside the box and find things that they weren't aware of, or neighborhoods they weren't aware of, or pockets they weren't aware of.
Profitability of a realtor, pretty meaningful, right?
Most realtors won't be able to be a business.
Right.
I think
The sellers will do fine, and they might capture more of it because they'll. My understanding is the seller will maybe do both sides of the transaction.
no, that's not what's going to happen, and there's also going to be limits on that. But here's what I will say.
So a lot of people think when we represent a seller, we only represent the seller. We do not double end. And the reason why we do that is there are clear conflict of interests. When we are hired and licensed, we have something called fiduciary duty, meaning we have 100% obligation to the clients that we represent. And if we were to represent both sides on a transaction, there's no way we could represent each party 100%. And furthermore, if you're doing this once or twice, who cares? But if you're doing this and you're doing this in volume, our insurance companies will drop us. They don't like that because the odds of your words and your contracts conflicting and your interests being muddled are huge. So we normally tell our buyers to, here are people we like, work with one of them, and we'd be happy to accept your offers. But we're not going to write the purchase and the listing agreement. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit of that.
If you look at the number of people, there are 1.4 million members of NAR today, the National Association of Realtors. If you look at the distribution of earnings, you guys know this, my guess is probably 10% of those realtors make 40% of the fee income or 50% of the fee income. That there's a long tail.
Yeah.
So there's probably a third of those folks who are already kind of sub living standards in terms of income. Maybe half of them won't be able to make enough money in this new, fee.
So this is a short segment, and that's a gross oversimplification. A lot of people have NAR licenses, and a lot of people are licensed as salespeople. It doesn't mean they're all working as realtors, and most of them are not full-time. If you're a mortgage lender, for example, you have to be licensed, and if you say 50% or more of those are mortgage lenders, then they're just doing that. They're not even in the real estate space. But no matter what space you're in, when we were doing these calculations and numbers, it all falls by the Pareto principle, 80-20. 20% of the agents in any market are the ones actually moving the market and responsible for, I would say, at least 40% of that income. But it's really that 2% of that 20% that's really moving that needle. And those agents within those groups, you don't pay them to get a transaction done. You pay them for the acclimation of their experience, for everything that they've been through, their resources, their know-how to solve the one particular need you have, whether it's buy and sell and do the very best job that they can.
It'll no longer be an attractive proposition to be a real estate agent for maybe 500,000 to 1 million people over time that are agents today.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sellers are going to be faced with buyers who just show up having seen something on Redfin and don't have a buyer's representation, and so they think, from the stuff I've been reading, that the seller's agent might be pointing them to, hey, go to these services, and be acting as like one broker, essentially representing both sides. That's what people are saying is the potential downside.
I don't think that's good. Yeah, that's not going to happen for a couple of reasons. But let me ask you guys a question. If you guys wanted to go buy a new house, currently you just go, sign up an agent or a buyer's agent, and they go walk with you, and eventually they'll get paid by the seller's agent. So now you have to negotiate a fee with them up front. Would you negotiate a fee and say to a buyer's agent, hey, I'll pay you 2% of whatever home I buy? Would you be comfortable doing that, or 3% or 4%? How would you have that conversation?
No,
what would you say, Sax? I mean, I know you've got a different situation because you've got real estate people working for you, but if you were to go out would you go out and get an agent and pay and negotiate a fee with them?
It is not worth it to the buyer to pay 2 to 3% of the purchase price to make appointments. You can see all the houses on MLS through Zillow or Redfin or whatever.
And what about handling closing and disclosures?
No buyer would ever voluntarily agree to pay this massive commission. It's not worth it. So it's game over for the realtors if buyers are forced to pay their own broker's commission. The only reason this system works is because the seller is forced to pay for it.
Yep.
And when you sign the listing agreement with the seller's agent, you can negotiate a little bit at the margins. Sometimes you can get the 6% down to 4 to 5% for a big listing, but 50% of it will always go to the buy side. I mean, I've said to these guys, the buy side agent doesn't do anything. Why don't you make it 2% for yourself and 1% for the buyer? They won't do that.
They just won't take your business. The seller will not represent you.
They have all sorts of rules against it. So the whole thing is it's like a racket that's protected
and
somehow.
Now it's been cracked. Yeah.
Well,
so this is partially true, and this is kind of our findings going into when we basically got our teeth kicked in because we tried to offer lower commissions. The industry really didn't like this. We basically said, hey, we're not being fair, we're not being cooperative. When we basically said, if we're taking a listing on for 2%, let's go ahead and also give the incentive for 2% for 4% total listing fee. One of the buyer agents had some really not so great words about that, saying, hey, you're ruining the industry. This is not what we work for, et cetera, et cetera. And we told them, well, kind of take it or leave it. So there's no rules. You could kind of write whatever you want. And also, I always say if the buying agent is unhappy with the commission, they can always modify that in the offer, meaning here's our offer and here's the listing fee or the commission I would like to get paid. So all this is up for debate. But also, I think he opens up a really interesting point. This is assuming the buyer gets the home in one single offer. If you've been here in Silicon Valley and a lot of other places, you notice it's incredibly competitive and it's really difficult to get your purchase at the right price. What that means is you could run into an agent and, being on the other end with listings, I see this quite a bit as well. I have other agents say, Wallace, you're never going to get that price. But I'm always looking for that agent who, is going to coach their clients to write some crazy price for the property. And is that morally correct? I don't know. It's not something that we do. We always try to write good contracts and contracts where we stand by and what I feel good in purchasing a property about. But sometimes I get directives from my clients saying, hey, Wallace, I'm okay paying $200,000 or $300,000 over market for this. Let's just get it bagged up. Let me know a number and I'll write that. And there are times where in those scenarios, I've talked to the listing agents. If you're going to shave some commission off your end, I'll shave some off of mine. Let's go ahead and get the deal done because we know this is a sure thing. But it's already difficult enough to purchase a home. Those commissions assume not just that property, but all the offers and all the things that they've reviewed up until then. It's a crazy thing because buyers agents are working for the buyers with no guarantee of a payday. And I don't think anyone else is in any industry is willing to do that. If your employer asked you, hey, put in the work this week and next week and the following week, and maybe I'll pay you at the end of the month, would you seriously be okay with that? So I do think this moves into kind of a time and material thing, but I also feel like the hurdle to buy a home is so difficult for a lot of people. How does that change when you need to pay for an agent to open the door for you? So imagine $200 for every door that you open, or forget $200. Let's call it $50. $50 for every home that you visit, plus time and material for mileage and whatever wear and tear. I think it just adds up. And if you don't eventually buy a home, does that agent charge you, or how does all that work? I think it creates a lot more questions than it does answers. But there are some points here.
I still am like a little bit skeptical that this is going to work out exactly the way we're saying, because it is just such a death blow to the industry if buyers are forced to pay their own commissions, their own buy-side broker's commission. And in the articles, they're saying there's still like some gray area about what's going to happen, but that is what should happen. Buyers should be responsible for paying their own brokers. And if you do that, I think you'll knock out half the fees of this industry.
Here's an idea. Why don't they charge an hourly fee as a buyer's agent? Like you
there
might
will
pay
be
for
people
what?
doing that, Jake.
$200 an hour, $300 an hour.
Doesn't this impact home prices as well? Like if the buyer had to pay, all of a sudden their affordability effectively goes down, because if they have to pay an extra $100,000 for a home, then that's $100,000 they can't pay, less than they can pay for the house itself, because they have to pay an agent. So
but
it all comes back into home prices, no?
It nets out because the seller's agent's no longer paying 6%, they're paying 3%. And so now the seller's agent has 3% more that
Right. So your net's the same.
Yeah, but net.
I think it's good for buyers and sellers because the transaction costs of creating go down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The money goes back in consumers' pockets.
Yeah, create a more fluid market. Yeah.
And I think it's a great opportunity for startups. I'll say this right now. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of startups that are going to come out of this ruling that are going to launch a la carte services leveraging AI. to make these services available direct to consumers without needing an agent. And they're going to be pretty compelling services, and they're going to show up real fast.
I mean, a lot of people will not.
So I do think so the settlement was just agreed upon. Other big brokerages like Compass also kind of fell in line and settled as well. And I think the next 2 to 3 years immediately is going to be the Wild West in real estate. All the rules and all the protections and against liabilities and whatnot are out the window. NAR is not forcing brokerages to become members. NAR is not forcing agents to become members. A lot of this stuff we try to work against when we launched Metis and realized that we were just swimming upstream. Now that we've decoupled commissions and performance, I think two things are going to happen. One, there's going to be a lot of new business models, and just a little forecast, we do have something coming on there. It's actually nothing super new. It's been something we've been working on for over a year. So I'm not jumping on the train. This is something that we've always been about here at Metis. The other thing is I think you have 2 to 3 years to really kind of see if that'll latch on and see if it'll change the market. The other thing is, and a lot of it, what I see is NAR, and there's a lot of smart people at NAR. There's a lot of smart people in lawyer offices who will switch a few things and it goes back to normal. But I think within that 2 to 3 or 3 to 5 years, we have a chasm. We have a real opportunity for change. But this really depends on consumers. You have to vote with your pocketbook. When we ran with the initial Metis model, our clients appreciated it, but end of the day, they wanted the performance more than anything else. And because we were able to perform, the discount was just the cream on top. But they were more worried about performance rather than fees.
Will not list their home or sell it because that 6% might put them underwater. So if it's now down to 2 or 3,
Totally.
Yeah, people might be like,
it's always been crazy to me that anyone would pay a percent of absolute value. It makes no sense. I bought a home for $1 million. I'm selling it for $1.1 million. So I've made $100,000 profit, but I got to pay $60,000 of my total gross to an agent to sell it for me.
Yeah, 60% of the profit goes to them. I
just gave up 60% of my profit on my home.
Right.
It makes no sense.
And the crazy thing is that a bad sale of your home would be, let's call it 900,000 or $1 million, and a great sale would be 1.2. So
exactly,
there's a very small margin where they actually have an impact based on the quality of their effort, but they get compensated for the whole thing.
Yeah, for the whole thing.
They
no
should
matter
get
what.
compensated.
No matter the outcome.
It should be that you get a flat rate, $10,000 at $1 million, and then you get 10% over $1 million or something. You could give, just like you might with a salesperson.
The incentive comp should be variable based on performance, whereas the guaranteed part of the comp should be, like you said, a flat fee. It's kind of like the salesperson has an OTE,
exactly,
right? They got
like
a base and variable.
Yeah. I mean, you could say, if you said 1% up to $1 million, so that's 10K, and then 10% for the next 100K, and then 20% for the next 100K. So you would, that 1.2 million is really hard to get. Yeah, I'll give you 20% of that incremental 100. That would be a much better deal. You'll be getting paid for the actual performance. So, anyway, really interesting.
But Jake, I have an idea for the National Association of Realtors.
Oh, here we go.
If they want to stop being perceived as an evil monopolist, all they got to do is put out a cringe ad talking about the environment. Everyone's going to love them again.
Absolutely. They should do an ad where they have a diverse cast of people, and that diverse cast could talk about like putting sustainable forestry around it.
All they got to do is say something landfills. Everyone will love them again. They can charge 6%.
Absolutely. Virtue signaling, right? They could genuine
something landfills.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's keep the train moving here. The AI landscape.
So there's a lot of interesting opinions and thoughts there. And first and foremost, I do like the set fee and performance bonus there. We actually had that as a compensation option, but no one has selected it because when you get into it, it actually gets pretty scary. But that being said, I wanted to rewind and everything that they talk about here, and it actually applies to all of you as well, because you're in the markets that we serve. The markets that we serve is a high dollar environment. But this lawsuit, and you have to keep in mind that NAR covers the entire nation. In most of the nation, most agents are making a couple thousand per sale, 2,000 to 3,000 per sale. Whereas over here, we're making, 5 and often 6 figures depending on the price point. So I don't think the percentage is necessarily the issue, but I do think the commission rates do need to change. At some point, the commission for services rendered doesn't really match up. A lot of the home prep that we work in, for example, the home prep that we do for a 1,000 square foot home in San Jose is the same amount of work and cost of the home in Palo Alto. But that home in Palo Alto arguably would be easier to sell at 300% the dollar amount as that San Jose home. So I think there's wiggle rooms. I think there is restructuring that needs to happen there. And I think that we'll see that moving forward. But when I was in college, I had a very specific car, and I was also involved with a bunch of enthusiasts on an online chat room. And everyone in this chat room had a different idea of how to fix different things in the car, like specific oil weights or the best cleaning products for these cars, or specific brake pads for different applications. And when I took it to my mechanic in Berkeley, Terry Griffin of Griffin Motorsports, fantastic guy and still a bud to this day, Terry kind of sat me down and said, hey Wallace, why do you want to do that, and why do you want to use that specific product? And he basically said something that changed the course of my beliefs. And he mentioned that those people on the forum are really smart people, but they're dentists, they're engineers, they're lawyers, they're everything but professional mechanics. And they especially, not only are they not mechanics, you're talking to a guy who works on a very specific car for his entire livelihood. And he not only works on these cars as general maintenance, but he also races them, and he autocrosses them, and so on and so forth. He uses these specific cars in a broader application than I ever will. And from that day on, I just said, Terry, whatever you want to do with the car, as long as it meets my needs, and that is to get me from point A to point B and basically not break down, you tell me what's best within that reasonable budget. And since then, he's never led me astray, and we're still buds today. Same thing with these guys. Brilliant people. I especially love the scenario where they talk about later on, when he talks about the new sovereign fund for AI with A16Z. But in terms of real estate, this is what we do. This is what we do all day. You're not paying me for that one single transaction. You're paying us for the breadth of our transactions and the knowledge and experience that we've procured to solve one specific need in your life. That's why you hire the team at Metis, and that's why we are deeply grateful for you choosing us. And there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of conjecture. This is only like a 12-minute segment. Of course, it's not long enough to encapsulate everything that's going on. A lot of that stuff will come out in the future. There's going to be hopefully a lot of change that moving forward. And I feel like there is a need for a new business model and a new perspective in this industry. It's the primary reason why I launched Metis and got involved. I really wanted to change how things in the industry were changed. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years we have that opportunity. Hopefully something will find traction, and hopefully you'll join us on that journey as well. But Metis will still be here. It'll still be the full service brokerage that you know. But I think it's I think we're cheating ourselves out if we don't try a few other things. So those of you who have questions on that. But without further ado, I want to thank you for always supporting us. Thank you for choosing Metis, for answering all of your real estate needs. We look forward to working with you. You guys mean the world to us. And thank you always so much for watching and supporting these videos. I'll see you guys soon.